I'm Mike Redding with Accenture Ventures, and I'm super excited to be here with this esteemed panel because we're here to talk a little bit about venture capitalists that are actively seeking to make investments in women-led and minority-led businesses and funds. And so we want to get to hear from them themselves, what they're looking for, how they're going about it, and why they think it gives them a competitive edge in the cutthroat universe of venture capital. But before we do that, I'd like each of the panelists to introduce themselves as people. What brought them here to the stage today? How did they get there? What was a bit of their journey? So you understand them before we dive into a little bit more of the details of their day-to-day job. So with that, Howie, why don't we kick off with you?
Great. I'm Howie Diamond. I co-manage a fund called Alpha Bridge Ventures. Kind of have an unconventional path to venture capital. I was a former rock star in my 20s. Literally, I was in the music business and I had a band, and I managed and played drums in that band. And we ended up getting signed and touring around the world and got to live my first dream of being a rock star, which is great. The band was called Low versus Diamond. We're still on Spotify. We released one album in 2006. Go listen to it. I'm very proud of it. Look it up, please. I will get my, $2.33 royalty check from ASCAP because of you. Thank you. So then the band ended. I wanted to do. I sort of had a lot of relationships in the music business, and I used those relationships and my experience working and managing in music to start my own music management and licensing company. It was my first startup, and I was a solo founder and ran that company for 2 years, managed artists, had a licensing division. Then hit a wall with music and wanted to do something bigger, wanted to make a larger impact, and so moved up to San Francisco in 2011. Wanted to learn the early stage tech startup game, entrench myself in the ecosystem, and really find a mentor to take me under his or her wing to show me the ropes and figure out where I could apply my skill sets to really be beneficial and also to learn. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be here. And so ended up finding a mentor, and he taught me about early stage tech investing. And for 4 years, I helped build a portfolio of 33 companies, worked very closely with startups. It wasn't actually a venture firm. It was an agency where we invested, advised, traded in-house services for equity, and we had an incubator arm. So it was a crash course in a lot of different areas. And I finally had the confidence and courage to start my own fund in 2015. My first fund was called Ranch Ventures. And I invested in 20 companies and wrote very small checks. I kept it general on purpose and casted a wide net, kept it very broad. I just, again, wanted to learn. I was a solo fund manager, and I just wanted to put money to work, put points on the board, establish a track record, didn't have a specific theme, just wanted to show that I can pick really good deals, and learned an incredible amount, and that's what led me to Alpha Bridge Ventures. The two big things that I learned from Ranch Ventures is that there's this untapped opportunity between seed and Series A. As Series A milestones are getting stretched. Post-seed, bridge, a lot of you have heard of bullpen capital. There's not a lot of players in that space. I started investing in deals that were ramping up to Series A. These weren't distressed companies. They were doing quite well, overperforming against their original growth projections. And they needed a little small insurgents injection of capital, $1 million, $1.5 million to raise to get them over their Series A milestones. And I started investing in the tail end of those deals. They're the top performing deals in my portfolio, so I'm applying that investing strategy into my next fund, as well as I started having conversations with founders. Myself being a former artist, former entrepreneur, solo fund manager, I went through my fair share of struggles, stress, anxiety, imposter syndrome. I was in the trough of sorrow. I went through it all. I have deep empathy for the founder journey and what they go through. Started having conversations with founders in my portfolio at Ranch Ventures, and they were opening up to me, and a lot of the struggles they were going through mirrored my own struggles, and I wanted to do something about it. I didn't just want to be a sounding board for them. So I decided with my co-managing director to build out a leadership development program to really help transition founders into effective leaders, help them build without burnout, across focus areas of mental, emotional, and physical health, which not a lot of people focus on for founders. We just expect them to figure it out, and I want to do something more. So we came up with this holistic integrated development program that's more of a structured approach to solving the problem that I'm really proud of, and that's how I got to where I am today.
All right, thanks. Christine, right, okay. Christine, a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got here today.
Sure, and I do have to, since I'm wearing the shirt, so I have to say something about the shirt. So if, I'm just curious, because I was not a Girl Scout, and I have a brownie at home. How many people here were Girl Scouts? That's a lot of ladies. All right, you need to go tweet. It's GS NorCal Pride Day, because they're all pissed off about the Boy Scouts saying we don't need Girl Scouts anymore. Because they take girls, so what's the point? Anyway, so I wore a shirt. In fact, I made a shirt with my daughter. She was very excited. So, Christine Herron, I work at Intel Capital, and I have been on both sides of the table, although not as famously as Mark Schuster has. And I am not from the West Coast. I am from South Florida, so which means I'm, kind of a hick. We hide that we're all hicks down there, but we really are. Although I think post the election, I think people now know we're actually all hicks. That is no longer hidden. Like, oh, it's just like New York. Like, no, it is not. It is absolutely not. So I came out, I moved out here actually after I'd already been in venture capital, so I have this strange experience of having been on the East Coast investor side and the West Coast investor side. They are very different. And at the time I did it on the East Coast, it was, I'm tired of sleeping on a friend's couch, I have no money, no one knows what it is, it's not cool, because this was in 1991, 92, and it was not something people did back then. So, but my mom was a data architect when, and this is sort of, we're supposed to tell our journey. So my journey is when my mother split up from my dad, she needed to go find something to do that made money as quickly as she, you do optimize. I have this long to get a job before I have no money, and what can I do that makes the most money sort of in that 12-month period, right? And she ended up being a COBOL programmer, which is not what, many ladies did in 1980. So she ended up being a COBOL programmer, sort of, fast forward some number of years. She's doing Wang VMS, fast forward some more years, and she's doing the first SQL databases. I learned Paradox, because of course you learn Paradox when you're a kid. Sorry, dating myself. And so I sort of had this different perspective of like, of course, women have that role because they like to solve puzzles, and we're fixers. Generally, we are fixers. And if you have that attitude, that lends itself very, very well to really most of the jobs in tech. You are a fixer. You are solving a puzzle of some sort. You can be an architect, or you can be a house architect, or you could be a database designer, and you're really just pushing boxes. It's a very similar experience. So I grew up looking at that, and so I sort of had this attitude, and I continue to have this attitude of when you come to a decision point and you're going to follow some fascination or not, making the choice that has the most branches. And so I'm going to take this branch of the tree, and it's got the most things that come off of it. So when I applied to graduate schools, I'm like, well, I don't need to go to grad school. It's not like I'm going to be a doctor. So I'm going to only apply to 2 schools that have great programs, and they're in the middle of technology centers, and they're in the middle of venture capital, because I was loving, this job I got in New York. And so I did not get into Harvard, and that's probably good. I am like way too weird. It would not have been healthy. And I went to Stanford, which was a much better fit. They like weird. And ended up staying out in California, and Lowe's is going to laugh this whole time because we know each other outside of this. Like, you don't know this. So anyway, I ended up staying out in California, and it's very interesting. I have this experience, on the East Coast where people don't like you and you know it. And one of the challenges you're going to have on the West Coast, particularly as women in tech or women entrepreneurs, is people aren't going to like you, and they're not going to tell you. And I know you feel me. So, you can't always get the knife at your chest. A lot of times it comes at the back. And so I think one of the things you just need to decide is, I know that's what I'm walking into. How do I want to handle it? And so I feel like I've spent my entire career just deciding how I'm going to handle it and like making choices where I know like, okay, I'm going to have more options this way, fewer knives in the back this way. And I've been lucky. I worked at First Round Capital, and that's, I was the first woman there, so that was a little bit of a challenge. I think if you look at the firm now, they've just done a fabulous job in sort of embracing some of the diversity challenges that were inherent, from when these firms get started. Same thing at Intel. When I first started there, it was the first place I'd been that really felt like a meritocracy. I'd never been in an equal partnership. Most VC firms are not equal partnerships. And that was such a formulaic set of rewards and compensation that I got to go, oh, this is weird. I don't have to fight for my piece. Like, everyone just gets, here's the formula, and let's see how you do. Like, I almost didn't know what to do with myself. So the diversity fund work now that I do, we have a $125 million commitment to diverse teams we made 2.5 years ago. We said we would invest that over a 5-year period. We have already invested it, and we've transitioned, and we'll talk about this more later, we've transitioned to actually having all investors be diversity investors. And I'm in the process of continuing that push, and that's been, one of the main things I've done over the last 1.5 years or so. And that's been just a fabulous experience. We got our diversity investing up from about 6% when we started 2.5 years ago to over 20% in 2017, and so we're on track to keep that moving. So that's exciting. And if you need cookies, I did bring some. I just brought a couple boxes because they're still hanging around my house. So, and I'll pass it to Lo.
All right. Thanks, Christine. All right, Lo, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Toney, and I definitely have a non-traditional path to venture capital. I was born in Oakland, California, so born and raised in Oakland, grew up there. Had the pleasure of going to high school with Christine's boyfriend. He was the class ahead.
I know, it's super funny.
And I went to a historically black college on the East Coast, Hampton University. If there's any pirates in the room, probably not. Do have the Oakland thing. How many people live in Oakland? I hope there's some Oaklanders there. All right, great, awesome. I now live in San Francisco, much to a lot of people's chagrin.
Poser.
I know. Barbara Lee gives me a lot of grief over that. So my path was to initially start my career in financial services. I really liked the financial services space, which helped because I learned how to do numbers and spreadsheets. And I went to Cal for grad school. Go Bears. The summer in between starting grad school, I actually bought a book on HTML and decided that I wanted to start doing web pages for companies. So I was doing that in between the time that I left my role in financial services and before I started at Haas, which was great. I really thought that the internet was interesting. I'm old, so this was 1995. So this was before Netscape went public, and just for some context. And when I entered grad school, all of my essays said, oh, I really want to continue my career in finance, and I want to be an investment banker. And I kind of actually did want to be an investment banker. And I thought that if you looked at the landscape back then here in the Bay Area, there were 3 or maybe 4 firms that were doing all the deals. It was Montgomery Securities, Robertson Stevens, Thomas Weisel, and Hambrick and Quist. And I thought Hambrick and Quist was the coolest of them all. And so that's what I wanted to do. But when I got to Haas, what was interesting is Haas had great ties to the venture space. And so a lot of venture capitalists started to come through. And so I curious, so I went to go see, okay, well, who's responsible for getting these companies to the point where they can actually get taken public by one of they called it the 4 horsemen. It was very gender specific. It probably was all men at that time. And so when I started to listen to some of the stories from the VCs, what I quickly realized that was in a generic sense, there were kind of 2 types of VCs. There were the pure financial types, right? So the folks that were coming out of investment banking, private equity, straight into venture, maybe even management consulting, I'll put in that bucket. And then there were the ex-operators. And the ex-operators at that time, again, this is back in 1995, so the ex-operators were mainly CEOs who had done companies and done really well and typically would go back to work for the venture fund that funded them. And I got more interested in venture capital than investment banking. Surprise, surprise. Hope there's no there probably are ex-bankers in the room.
You make less money, though.
True, but there's more upside. There's upside. That's why we do this game. Yeah. And the thing that was most interesting to me was I was much more aligned with, at least philosophically, the folks that were operators as opposed to the pure financial types. So I started asking the ex-operator, hey, how do I be like you? How do I be like you? And they gave me a simple playbook. It was, in its generic sense, it was go be a product manager, go and run a big P&L, and if you can, be a CEO of a venture-backed company. And the reason to be a product manager is because if you think about what a product manager's job is, a product manager is trying to figure out new opportunities and look at markets and what's the problem, what's the competitive landscape, how do we distribute this thing, how do we make money from this thing. And it's very similar to the same playbook that a VC uses in early stage venture capital. It's almost identical. And then the reason of running a big P&L was, if you're in a big company, you kind of understand how a big company works, and hopefully you can pick one that grows, and you can see the process and the growing pains that happen for a big company. And it kind of preps you to, if you run a big P&L, it kind of preps you to be a CEO. So I was a hired gun CEO, and if you're a CEO, the benefit of that, for the most part, is you kind of understand the venture process from the other side of the table, as well as you develop a sense of empathy for the entrepreneur. And I got to tell you, it really changes the dynamics of the conversation when the entrepreneur knows that you've been in a situation where you had to make payroll and you had to do what was ever necessary to be able to keep the company going. So those were all the things that I tried to get into my career in order to get to this seat here today. And what I always tell people is, if possible, try to get in this seat as quickly as you can, because when you first enter a venture fund, you're going to have crappy economics, because not all partnerships are created equal. And so you have to prove yourself by getting some good deals, and then the next fund maybe you get a little bit better economics, and then you get some better deals, and so on. So, given that the normal life of a fund is 10 years, and although, the process or timing to raise funds has been condensed, nonetheless, you want to be in the game for probably 15 plus years. So that's always my recommendation, and happy to share more afterwards if you want to hear more about my journey. But you probably will not meet another VC that grew up in Oakland, went to a historically black college, did not go to Harvard or Stanford. Did I say I'm an African American? You could probably see that, and is a sneakerhead. So I am truly a unique VC.
All right. Thanks, Lo. Well, so very colorful, great backgrounds, bring a lot of different perspective, and it's about diversity, right? That's what we're here to talk about. So what I thought we would do is we double click on each of our panelists in terms of their current fund, their approach to investing, and understand a little bit more what they're looking at and why they're doing what they're doing. So we're going to kick off with you, Howie. So you mentioned that your Alpha Bridge Fund intends to take a humanistic approach to the founders of the companies you fund. Can you describe a little bit more about that approach? Why'd you make that the centerpiece of your strategy, and the impact you think it's having?
Sure. So I think people are the cornerstone to any business. I think you can only take your business, your company, your business as far as you take yourself. I fundamentally believe that. I've experienced that. I think a lot of VC firms say that people is really an important part of the calculus and the equation in terms of what companies they invest in. But for the most part, they're investing in the companies and they're betting on the people who are running the companies. Well, so I thought about that and I said, okay, well, I want to invest in companies and I'm betting on people too, but I want to hedge my bet. And the way to hedge my bet is to actually invest directly into the people running the companies as well as their companies. That seems like a reasonable approach to winning, to getting companies to succeed. And if the people are an integral part of that success, then I want to make sure that those specific individuals have what they need to succeed. And it's not just on the professional level. It's not just executive coaching. I started realizing that it's this integrated approach, areas of their personal life. Are they eating right? Are they sleeping enough? What are the stresses and anxieties that they're going through on a day-to-day basis? Again, a lot of the stuff that I experienced, do they suffer from imposter syndrome? Do they have self-doubt? How are the relationships in the company, right? We all know founders, it's a relationship, it's a marriage. And are there 60% of companies that die because of co-founder conflict? There was a study that was done that shows that. So I really thought that it was important to invest in people and to create a program that would allow us to work in a way with our founders to put the companies in the best possible position to win. And I think that
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, how do we actually execute against that? And we brought on a PhD and master's in clinical psychology. This woman who is building the program for us, she specializes in organizational behavior and development. She has this vision on how a program like this should be run. We're really lucky to have her. Her name's Carrie, and she's running the program for us. So Jake and myself we know what we're good at running a fund, or we think we know what we're good at. But we know what we're not good at, and we don't know how to build out a program like this. So we didn't want to go out there and just talk about solving it in this sort of institutionalized way and then not actually delivering results. So we brought on someone to help us think through that and come up with the process and content and model and framework on how this program should run. And she's launching a beta program next month with 11 founders. We're going to learn an incredible amount from that beta program. She conducted a qualitative research study with 15 founders. I validated a lot of our assumptions and suppositions in terms of what founders need, how they'd want to participate in a program like this being offered by a VC, what are the confidentiality issues and trust issues that are at play here, what are the liability issues that are at play here. So we're really learning a lot. But yeah, and so in terms of investing in diverse founders, there is the VC industry is overwhelmingly skewed to white males, as we know, in terms of that we're investing in white males primarily. And I think that we want to fill the gaps in terms of offering this program that we have to females and minorities, to help them with connections and help them with insights to level the playing field with this skewed environment. So I think that there's a lot of value and benefit that we could bring to the table to female and minority founders. By the way, my first fund, Ranch Ventures, half of the portfolio companies are female-led. I failed to mention that. That was not intentional. That was not my theme or what I set out to do. It just ended up that way. So I have a feeling in my next fund it's going to be similar, and I want to make sure that I have adequate resources that I can bring to the table for those female minority founders. At the same time, thank you. At the same time, I think it's important to educate the white male founders as well, to help them understand about the importance of cognitive diversity in hiring practices, the importance of having a diverse team across racial and gender and ethnic backgrounds, because there's studies that also show that the more diverse your team is, the more innovative and creative and successful you'll be. So I think a lot of those white male founders don't know that, and I think they need to be educated on that. And I think when they go through our program, that's part of the things that we're going to bring, that's part of the value that we're going to bring to the table for them as well. So it kind of goes both ways.
Have you asked people, so I'm like, I want to ask, I have all these questions. But I'm going to throw at least this one out. So one of the things that I just own when I talk about diversity is you get, in theory, better outcomes, but it takes a little longer because there's friction that's inherent in everyone not speaking the same language. And that friction is what rubs all those rough edges off of whatever you're trying to do and makes it more successful. So how do you balance what you're doing with your white male founders against sort of, everyone in Silicon Valley saying, go faster, go faster, go faster. You got to, work together. You got to be agile and speed, which is not conducive to sort of the thoughtful, frictionful process that kind of can go with the diverse team. Like, how are you balancing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we're going to educate. I mean, again, this program that we have is and the beta program that we're running is to really learn how to work with. And in the beta program, we have a diverse subset of founders across racial, ethnic, gender, different stages, and so forth. So I think we're gonna take the next 3 months to really sit with them, understand how they're gonna maximize the value from our program, and understand how they're gonna be able to find that balance. I think is really important. So I can come back to you on an answer with that. I don't know at this
You're going to figure that out. You're
figure
going
it
to see
out.
how they react.
Yeah, we're
like, this
taking-
is slowing us down,
Yeah, we're taking a very evidence-based approach. We're not just going out there. I mean, to some extent, we're operating it like a startup, and we're throwing stuff up against the wall and seeing what sticks and moving fast and breaking things. But at the same time, we are using a more scientific and evidence-backed approach framework that we want to test and execute against.
So let me ask you a quick follow-up, then we'll move on. So since it's you're taking an iterative test and learn approach to this, did you find, because it's obviously a bit different than the typical VC storyline, and also you comment on the fact that these are companies that are in that kind of bridge to A, so they're already in motion. Did you find that this was attractive to some of the founders when they heard about it were like, yeah, that's exactly what I want, or they like, that's kind of weird, it's not what other guys and girls are offering me. Did it act as an attractor to your fund compared to other funds in the Valley? Because there's a lot of money floating around. Was this, did you see, was this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had overwhelming sentiments from founders basically saying, where have you been my whole life?
Because it's not their first rodeo. They've met VCs before.
Yeah, and the stage focus is really important because conceivably, these founders that are in this really exciting time of their company life cycle, they're approaching their first institutional round of financing, their Series A. It's great, but you have to also understand they've probably been 3 years in the trenches. They're probably quite fatigued and are on the precipice of burnout. So I started getting sentiments from founders, giving testimonials of like, look, this is great. I'm so excited that we're ramping up here, but at the same time, I'm about to hit a wall, and I don't really know what it takes and if I have the skill sets that are necessary to run a $50 million company and manage 50 people, because I've been managing 7 people in a garage in Palo Alto the past 3 years. So I thought that was really interesting. So I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. We're kind of looking at this program. First of all, I believe it's the right thing to do first and foremost to offer these types of services because no other fund is doing this. By the way, after we write a check into a deal, we pay for an entire year of the founders to go through what we're calling a Project Atlas is the name of our development program. The founders get to go through Project Atlas in its full expression for a year, and we're paying for it. So they were really excited about that. There's also a framing issue that's really interesting because if founders go out and try to seek these services on their own, they're shameful about it. And founders are prideful creatures. And it's very difficult to find these services. You don't know who to trust. They're very expensive. They're not personalized or catered to the founder's needs, and so it's just difficult to navigate those waters. But they said that if a program like this was offered to them as an extension of a VC fund that came in and wrote a check, they feel okay about talking with that, as long as there's a wall set up between the VC fund and the development program, because again, that confidentiality and trust issue. So we spun Project Atlas out as a separate LLC because of that. Again, listening to our founders, understanding what they want, and then acting accordingly.
Right, thanks. Christine, I'd like to come back to you now. You talked a little bit about the Intel Diversity Fund, so talk a little bit more about it, and also because you're saying it's going through a transition, I'd love to understand more about where it's come from and where you're going next.
So when we started the Diversity Fund, it was part of a broader diversity initiative at Intel. So we announced a bunch of goals at CES at the same time, and that was $300 million for workforce development and goals about full representation, establishing a diversity office. So a bunch of changes at the same time as announcing the Intel Capital work. And So we started there, and it was kind of what you would expect from an execution point of view. You had someone who was in charge of it, this woman, Lisa Lambert, who has since left Intel, but she was, the one who made that happen, and a couple of folks on her team. And they went out and they invested in some diverse founders, and it was across different sectors. And I think we stood out because that was the largest commitment to diversity at the time. I think it's probably, if it's not still the largest, it's probably one of the, $125 million is a big diversity fund. Especially if you think that most VC funds are 10-year funds, it's kind of like a $250 million fund compared to a typical structure. So we set it up like that, and then about a year in, Lisa left. We sort of said, okay, how are we going to hand this off? Now's the time to take a pause, and you say, okay, we've been doing it for a year. What have we learned? Like, what should we be doing? Like, let's look in the mirror a little bit. And we had learnings from other areas inside Intel because we had supplier diversity and employee resource groups and folks focused on retention. We had people working on policy in Washington, right? So we had all these different things that we knew about. And so a couple of things stood out. One of them was elsewhere inside Intel, we recognized more types of diversity and recognized the challenges from other underrepresented communities. So one of the first things we did, and it was interesting, we received an award for this lately, and I told folks, like, you don't understand, that was like a 2 or 3 email decision. It was not like this big process that should be recognized. Where I sent an email to Trina Van Pelt, who's my partner in crime in diversity on the Intel Capital side, and Wendell Brooks, who runs Intel Capital, and I sent them this email that said, hey, our supplier folks and our resource folks, we've got more people we take care of. We look at LGBTQ, we look at U.S. military veterans, and we're looking at people with physical disabilities. Like, is there a reason we don't do that with our fund, or was that just because that's not what we, were thinking about at the time,
Right.
And then the emails all came back like, yeah, no, there's no reason we're not doing that. I'm like, okay, great. So is there any reason that we cannot, pinged a couple of people, any reason to not sync this up? And okay, great. We are going to make an announcement that we are now going to support these other groups. And apparently that made us the first LGBTQ fund, which was not the intention. So now apparently it was the biggest diversity fund. It was now the first LGBTQ fund, or even LGBT fund. And there are some smaller funds for the other communities, but that was pretty cool, I thought. And so that was one thing. And then the second thing that we did was take a look at how are we actually supporting these and what's the right way to go about our daily work. And did it make sense for us to have a couple of folks? Because, you had this diversity portfolio, and you've got people doing battery technology, and you've got consumer, digital content, because you've got Brit Media in there, and then you've got Savioke, which is making robots, right? Like, they don't need the same support. They don't need the same advice. So we said, okay, so we need to, kind of get this out of the closet and out and about. And so what we did was said, okay, we're going to change this from this vertical silo that's treated as a sector like all the other sectors at Intel, where we have 50 people making investments across, 10 sectors. And we're instead going to say, okay, if we were going to take this and spread it across all those sectors, what does that look like? How do we structure incentives? How do we say it? How do we look at what qualifies? So that people can understand it. What do we need to teach our people sitting on boards so that they know about some of these differences? They haven't invested in women before. If they haven't worked with 2 straight white men to hire and think about the Rooney Rule, like, how do you help those investors? Which are actually still doing some of that work now and doing some internal training. So as we go through that, I think that's been the second biggest change, and that was a huge driver of our change in investment pace, where in the first year, we made about $25 million of diversity investing. And that's both new and follow-on into companies with diverse teams. And, then we got up to, in 2.5, a whole $125 million. That's what happens when you have 50 people thinking about it instead of 3. makes a pretty big difference. And so now that's part of our goal is how do we take that and sort of evangelize and have some influence with other groups. We've been a center of gravity. There are now all these great new funds and great folks doing work, particularly at the early stages. So when you go quit your jobs and you go start companies and you go talk to Lo, or to one of the many other fine folks doing emerging, sort of those first little, micro checks. How do we make sure that the Series A check is sitting behind it, and we have funds doing Series A and doing Series B? Because that's usually a problem when something gets started, is you don't have that second, that third check sitting there ready to go.
So as a follow-up, and I don't want to phrase this incorrectly, but is it kind of going from a separate but equal status to more of a fully integrated program? Is that, that sounds like the direction, and as you said, it really acts as an accelerant on the broadening of diversity investing. So maybe, is there any risk of separation, and that a fund should seek that kind of integration, or?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. We were talking about this a bit backstage. So there's the whole Girl Scout thing, right, where you have Boy Scouts of America is now saying, well, that school doesn't need to make space for Girl Scouts because we take girls, right? But the Girl Scouts are saying, well, no, we still need space. And I went to, when I was a senior in high school, I applied to both Barnard and Columbia because I'm a hick, what do I know? And so I applied to both of them, got into both of them, and I went to Columbia not really understanding why Barnard was still there. And then by the time I graduated, it was because sometimes people just want their space, right? And you need to have that space depending on where you came from. And so I do think you need both. You need both that integration space, and at certain points in your development, you need that space where you feel like you can stretch your wings a little bit more. And the things that are stylistic differences, whether it's because of gender or ethnicity or you name it, you get to get rid of those because it's exhausting to have friction all the time. Every so often you need the friction to kind of come down a little.
Gotcha.
So I do think both are important, and so the way we've addressed that in the work is, sort of across the board, whether it's IoT investing or data center investing or connected car, those are folks that are looking to build diverse portfolios from the founder's point of view. But at the same time, we recognize that different teams will need different support, and so we're trying to have folks hey, if you've got a diverse founding team, here's some of the issues they're going to face. They're not going to be the same as your other companies. If you're going to be a good investor, you're going to help them get through that. That's your job. And if you have a non-diverse team, flip the coin over, they're going to need some diversity at some point in order to compete in the modern talent pool. You're not going to be able to have 30 guys go to hire a woman and have her say, yeah, I'm kind of a token, so no thank you.
Right.
Right. And so you can't do that either. So you have to coach those folks on how do you bake that in very early, because it's a lot easier to change with 5 people than 50.
Fantastic. Lo, let's come back to you. So can you talk a little bit about, we've heard from Intel, but now let's hear the GV perspective and on diversity, what you've been doing there and where you go from here.
Absolutely. I was a former partner with GV, formerly known as Google Ventures, and it's the early stage venture unit for Alphabet. There are about 4 billion plus in assets under management and about 400 active portfolio companies. And the key, I think, with GV is that GV invests just like a normal standalone financial focused VC. So unlike some corporates Qualcomm Ventures, Salesforce Ventures, GE Ventures that look for a strategic fit within the mothership business.
Accenture Ventures? Like us? Yeah, I'm with you. I get you. I understand what you're saying.
GV focuses more on just trying to make money. That's it. And
always good. That's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. So Alphabet has a lot of money, so they're trying to find places.
Trying to make even more.
They make more, of course.
Apparently not enough.
Fiduciary responsibility to shareholders.
That's right.
So one of the things that was interesting is Larry and Sergey, the founders, really wanted GV to get more aggressive in deploying more capital. And when we looked at the various ways to do it, there's only a few ways. You can write bigger checks, but we didn't want to do that because there's another group, Capital G, formerly Google Capital, that writes the larger checks. Very clever names here. And you could go into other sectors to invest into. Didn't want to do that, wanted to stick to our knitting and the things that we know best. So then it becomes a top of funnel issue. How do you identify more companies where you can write the same size checks for GV that's 5 million to about 25 million, and in the same quality of companies, in the same sectors? And one of the things that we looked at were, where are the leverage points that we could identify to be able to provide us with access to more deal flow? When we looked at the different places we get deal flow, our current ex-entrepreneurs, Googlers, current Zooglers, as well as other VCs that are downstream, upstream, same stage, what we really saw was the explosive growth in the seed stage, and we realized that we needed to develop more relationships. And one thought that we had was, wow, you know, if you look at the composition of the partnerships of these early stage funds, we're seeing much more diversity. Like, you see way more diversity in the seed stage funds than you do at the, you know, Excels, Benchmark, Sequoias, or even the GVs of the world. And in fact, Samir from First Republic Bank did a study once, maybe it's 2016 or something, maybe 2015, and he saw that 50% of the partners at seed stage funds were people of color, and about 20% were women. So that's where you see the diversity. And so our thought was, wow, you know, if we partner with some of these seed stage funds, we can identify differentiated deal flow, number one, and number two, and this really plays in at the seed stage, when you have a woman or a person of color, they will often have a different lens to see opportunities that other folks might miss until the numbers are super compelling, right? Anyone can look at something with crazy numbers and, oh, wow, that's a great deal. And so we did that at GV, and it worked for us. And that inspired me to do Plexo Capital. So I've spun out, and Plexo Capital focuses on similar strategies. So it's a hybrid, investing both as an LP into funds led by a woman or a person of color, plus doing direct deals that we source from the portfolios of GPs where we have an LP stake. And I believe very much in identifying different networks as a way to improve your diversity numbers across the board. I mean, this could be a conversation around hiring at a big company. And so when you think about how do you find most of your employees, you get them through referrals. And if your referrals sources all look like you, went to the same schools that you did, live in the same neighborhoods, and your kids play together, then guess what kind of people you're going to get. So it's funny how that works. Plexo, in fact, is Portuguese for intricate network. And so I really believe that, you know, the more that you can penetrate into other networks, you will absolutely identify a different set of deals. And when you have a diverse set of investors around the table, what ends up happening is, as a result of those networks, you see more top-of-funnel deal flow from diverse entrepreneurs, and therefore the portfolios themselves end up being more diverse.
Oh, thanks. So I'm getting the high sign that we're running time. Do we have time for at least one audience question, or are we going to get the straight cutoff?
We can do one audience question.
All right, one really good question from the audience.
Anyone? There in the back. Okay.
Put the pressure on when you say it has to be really good.
Well, there's only one.
See, this is women. We worry too much when you say that. Like, oh,
sorry.
mine won't be good enough.
Oh, damn.
Mine will just be a comment, so she can still have a question.
Okay, a fast comment then.
Okay. I'm Linda Sharp with Religence in San Francisco, and I just wanted to point out that the Girl Scouts have a STEM program. So the question is, do the Boy Scouts have a STEM program for the girls and the boys? Question mark.
I will not cast shade, but you know.
Fast question. So it's really great to hear all the conversations around diversity, but I'd like to hear more about the problems facing those of us over 50 and what's happening with the age discrimination.
I'll touch it. Yeah. And it's interesting. So we've done, and this has been internal. This has not been something we've done, you know, sort of in the community. A series of sort of internal explorations around intersectionality. And what does that mean? And I remember, so Barbara Y., who's our Chief Diversity Officer, I sent her this note. I'm like, hey, I don't want to, you know, piss anyone off by accident, like I do, and I don't, you know. As if I say intersectionality and I'm applying it to someone who's not, you know, a woman of color, like, is that okay? Like, you know, is that appropriate? Because I was thinking about something else. And she's like, yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, okay, good, because all of a sudden I can feel it coming. You know, I'm looking at 50, it's coming my way, and I'm trying to duck, but I don't think I'm going to get away. And so we've been talking about it internally because one of the big challenges, of course, is even just, as an investor, when they go to hire someone at a firm, they want the 30-year-old product manager or someone who's been a CEO and maybe a little bit older, right? It's that idea of like you have enough scope, but you're still young enough to be relevant. And so you have this concern that as you get older, you're not relevant. And one of the things that's been interesting as we've gone into more scientific research types of investments is seeing that there is a bit more age diversity. And so if you're looking at consumer, you have a few folks that are more further along in their careers that have been super, super successful, and this is like their 8th company. Or you have people where it's their very first time and they're 22, right? You don't have a lot in the middle. If you look at things, anything around healthcare, again, things that take a longer time, and you have, again, more scientific backgrounds, AI, some of the, sort of anything around automotive, you do get a little more seniority at the table, which is nice. You need it to be taken seriously and to have the experience. But it's absolutely a huge problem. And I know when we've talked about it, we say, okay, so, because we do try to track with the rest of what we do internally, and so far we don't have the employee resource group for the old people. Like, it's not, right? It's like when I hit 50, I'm not gonna have like some group I get to go join. I'm still just gonna be in the girls group. And so I don't think that as an industry we've done yet a good job at thinking through that and saying, how do we acknowledge, sort of the benefits of diversity when it comes to experience. And that's really, for me, there's 2 pieces of that. There's age, and so you look at the world differently. I mean, look at freaking OXO. I will buy every product they ever make because I'm addicted to OXO, and that was made for arthritic hands, right? OXO wouldn't exist, and I bet everyone in here has something from OXO at their house, but you're clearly not all arthritic. So how do we get more products like that think about accessibility? Well, you need more entrepreneurs that are frankly older. And at the same time, there's these other spaces where you don't get to go build a company in that space unless you've got a long career of relationships and experience doing products with really long development times, years instead of months. So yeah, people are aware, but it's not fixed.
All right, well, with that, we want to thank the panelists for some great insights, some great food for thought. Thank all of you for joining us.